Room for Another. Book 3 of the Riverton Romances. Chapter 1. Celeste closed the booking register and looked around the customer area of her business. It wasn't big, but there was no need for space. She loved the rustic, relaxed look. Her customers weren't looking for a big storefront. They wanted qualified tour guides and a friendly atmosphere. A sign that was usually on the sidewalk stood against the wall. Tracks, an eco tour company, and a front counter where people signed up for one of the eco tours on the schedule was all that mattered. In addition, there was a small office in the back where she kept her files and did the paperwork that every business owner hated. Riverton was a treasure of nature walks, swimming, and fishing. Hers was one of 3 tour companies in town, and there was plenty of business to go around during the season, enough most years to pay the bills in the off-season. It made her smile at the memory of how scared she'd been to start a business. It had seemed like a huge decision at the time. The new house had put that in perspective. Creating a business paled in comparison to buying a 100-year-old house that needed time and skill that she wasn't sure she had. She walked over and straightened the brochures on the counter, then refolded the stack of Trax t-shirts that customers seemed to love. Today was quiet. There were no tours booked because she was moving, and her 2 employees had the day off. There was a kind of ghostly presence in the room, like the people who usually worked here left a bit of themselves behind. The last thing to check was the apartment upstairs. It was empty except for a few supplies like coffee, tea, mugs, and a kettle. What was her home until today was now the coffee station for her employees. Celeste would find a tenant for the apartment as soon as she was settled in the new house. There was too much to think about with the move, and she had to focus on that. Starting out right in the house was important. If things went perfectly today, then that would be an omen for the whole restoration. Chuckling at the thought of her house being new, it was only new to her, Celeste headed for the stairs to her apartment for one last look before it became just an empty room. When that was done, she'd spend the afternoon in the old Victorian house. It had felt empty when she let the movers in with the basic furniture, but by the time she was done, it will be filled with her taste, her ideas, and her passion. The apartment was 2 rooms, a bathroom, and an all-purpose living room, kitchen, bedroom. It had been perfect until the day she saw her new home. Celeste was doubly glad of the size of the apartment as she checked that there were no boxes left behind. It only took seconds. All that was left were the 2 worn-out chairs she didn't want to put into her new home. Leaving felt sad and exciting all at once. She would miss the coziness of the room. It had been her home for 5 years. But the Victorian had 6 bedrooms along with 2 parlours and a basement. She told herself to buck up. Having a garden and a real kitchen was worth a little feeling of loss. Back in the ground-level office, Celeste saw Max and Alicia peering through the window. She waved and unlocked the front door for them. "I'm just about to leave," she said, then stopped. Max looked serious. He was in uniform and didn't smile when he stepped through the door. He was here on official business. Alicia followed Max. When Alicia moved to Riverton to be with him, Celeste had quickly found a friend. When Alicia moved to Riverton to be with him, Celeste had quickly found a friend in the cheerful newcomer, and her fun, take on any challenge personality, had sparked more than a few adventures. Celeste wished she could look more put together like Alicia. Her own casual look worked for her business, but every now and then Celeste wished her blonde curls could be more easily tamed, or that she had the courage to cut it short. Alicia's spiky black hair went with her edgy approach to life, but today Alicia was as somber as Max. Celeste felt her breathing tighten. This was more than serious. Max touched her elbow and guided Celeste towards the stairs. "Let's go up where we have privacy." Nodding, she allowed him to lead her to the apartment, Alicia following close behind. Upstairs, her apartment felt like a closet with all three of them there, along with the emotional presence of Max's unspoken news. The longer he took, the harder it was going to be. "Just tell me, Max." Her voice caught on his name. "I received a call from the Seattle police. There is no way to make this easy to hear. Your sister and brother-in-law were coming home from vacation. The plane they chartered crashed on landing, and there were no survivors." The world filled with silence. It had a physical force pressing on her, cold and hard and persistent. Celeste dragged in a breath against the pressure. Her mind reached out for something to say, but words wouldn't change anything. Alicia handed her a tissue. "Celeste, I'm so sorry." The pressure eased a little with Alicia's words. They didn't give comfort, but she did feel like the world existed again. Then she realized the bad news wasn't everything. "My nephew? Was he with them?" Max shook his head. Relieved that Tristan was safe, Celeste realized he was alone. What's happening with Tristan? How was she going to help a child when she could barely think? Max knelt before her and took her hands. "He'll be here tomorrow. A social worker will bring him." Celeste pulled her hands free. She didn't have time to wallow. She had to figure out where Tristan would sleep, and she had to get groceries. What kind of food would a 10-year-old boy want? She pushed aside the overwhelming desire to crawl into a corner and cry. Alicia got them to their feet. "I'll get someone to cover the phones at Trax," she said, making Celeste wonder if she'd spoken her plans aloud. "I can see it on your face," her friend added. "You don't have to sort everything out right now. I'm sure we can find a place for you to stay if the house is in too bad a shape. Maybe the inn has a free room. Between Stella at the diner and Spike at the inn, you'll have enough food to sustain you for as long as you need." Spike, the chef at the inn. Yes, food wasn't going to be an immediate problem. The realization didn't lift any of the panic she was feeling. "I can't hide at the inn," Celeste said, standing and wiping her eyes. "I appreciate the offer, but I have to get ready. Tristan will need all kinds of things I don't have. I need to get ready." Her voice trembled on the last words. "How did you get ready for this?" "Okay, maybe it will be better for you to be busy," Alicia said. "I'll tell Spike what's happened, and he can get some food ready, and I'm sure they'll have some spare linens to lend you. I'll talk to Nikki and Spike as soon as I've got you settled." Celeste didn't have the energy to argue, and she wasn't sure that she wanted to. Alicia would make sure she didn't just break down or do everything wrong. Flynn leaned close and looked down the length of the banister on the inn's main staircase. He straightened and gave it a pat of satisfaction. No more rough patches or gouges. It was ready for a coat of varnish. By morning it would look perfect. There were no guests here tonight, so no chance of someone rubbing against the finish and ruining clothes and all his work. This was the last bit of repair he'd been able to get Nikki to agree on taking as payment for his room and board. He had no excuses left. It was time to figure out what he wanted to do now that he was theoretically grown up. Most of the last 10 years had been spent trying to please his parents. He'd worked in offices, doing everything from temp work to paralegal. It wasn't that the work was hard or boring. Office work just wasn't for him. He'd taken a break and rode his motorcycle from Alaska to the tip of South America, hoping to get an insight. The trip had taught him two things. He preferred to sleep in a bed rather than under the stars, and he needed to get out of the offices. Now he was back, and had been for a few months, but no closer to knowing what to do. When Alicia pointed him in the direction of Riverton and her friend Nikki, he'd taken the job. But now it was time. His savings were running out, and Alicia might be his favorite cousin, but even she would lose patience with his restlessness soon. After one more swipe of the wood with a damp rag to collect any sanding dust, Flynn headed for the kitchen to see if Spike had fresh coffee and time to talk. He heard Alicia before rounding the corner into the kitchen. "Can you spare some time to put together a few meals for her?" Alicia asked the cook. Well, Spike was more than a cook, but he preferred the title to anything fancier. "Yep. She won't have the energy to do much, what with the boy and the house," Spike said as he wiped his hands. "Maybe I can find some time to help her out with the renovations." Spike nodded his welcome at Flynn and kept working. Flynn knew that Spike had no free time. The man practically lived in the kitchen, not happy when anyone else was using his equipment. Maybe it was something he could help with, take the load off. He ignored the little voice that told him he was just looking for an excuse to put off his decision. "What's going on?" Alicia jumped. "Geez, Flynn, how are you so quiet?" Not waiting for him to answer, she told him about Celeste's problem. He'd met Celeste when he first arrived in Riverton. Pretty, and she had a good eye for what people wanted when it came to echo tours. She was a bit too focused on her business for him. That might be more about his problem with no focus. He was willing to admit that, even if only to himself. "I could check out the house for her," he offered. "I have nothing but time." Spike gave a quick grin and went to the refrigerator to pull out packages. Did the man have a problem with Flynn helping? Probably not, but Flynn would check later. This was a good opportunity to do more than the few repairs he'd been doing around the inn. Maybe do a full restoration. Alicia narrowed her eyes at him. "Really? Shouldn't you be filling your time with planning your future?" He didn't like that she was so quick to be suspicious of his motives. She said it with a little laugh, but he couldn't argue with the observation. "Yes, but I can't do that 24 hours a day. Your friend needs help. I can do renovations, or I can make sure she picks a good contractor," he said. His preference would be to do the work for her. A big renovation would take long enough that maybe he'd figure out what most people figured out in their early 20s. It couldn't be too late. He was just barely in his 30s. "She needs some major work done," Alicia said, sounding unsure if she was objecting or clarifying. Flynn saw that uncertainty as opportunity. "If I can't do the work myself, I can find a trade to do it. The important thing to remember is I'm available and I know what I'm doing. If I'm there, she can concentrate on the boy, not worry about the house." "But what about—" Alicia shrugged. "You know, I'm your cousin, not your mother. I'm supposed to get you into trouble, not nag you about growing up. I'll talk to Celeste. I'm not making any promises." She took a plastic container of food from Spike, thanked him, and left the two men alone. Flynn poured a mug of coffee and waited for Spike to finish preparing bread dough for the next day. "You know any trades?" Spike asked as he washed his hands. Flynn hoped he hadn't been too rash. If the house was falling apart, he'd hate to be the one to add to Celeste's burden. "No, but I figured you did." "Smart guess. You know anything about 10-year-old boys?" He hoped that Celeste would be looking after the boy. "Other than being one, not much. I don't expect to be babysitting." Spike laughed at that. "Even if he wasn't just made an orphan, most boys that age would hang around and want to help. You better be ready to deal with that too. Those women aren't going to let you avoid the kid." By "those women," Flynn knew Spike meant more than just Alicia and Celeste. This was a small town, and if he caused more problems, there were any number of women who would be happy to set him straight. It was something he'd deal with if it happened. There was no use borrowing trouble. His job right now was to advise Celeste, maybe offer to do the work for her, and get a plan for his future in place so his parents could stop nagging him.